Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. This one is over lesson 15. Yesterday, I finally fixed that technology problems, and we were able to have a virtual class over lesson 14. If you missed lesson 14, please go back and watch all the pre-recorded lesson videos for the week, because I know this week has been a little bit weird because I haven't been able to really hold virtual classes, and y'all have had to just watch the pre-recorded lesson videos. But hopefully, everything is back to normal now, and we can move forward. Okay. But let us start with lesson 15. So it's a little bit different for the beginning. There's no announcements for today because y'all already know all the announcements at this point. There's no point in constantly repeating them. Y'all know what is expected of you at this point. So first slide is fantastic job for all of those people on this slide currently. If your name is on here, keep up the great work. Like, great job. Y'all are killing it. The people that are on here, they're on this slide right now because they've completed all the major assessments, which is the 3-week assessment, the 6-week assessment, and they've done STAR testing. So if your name is not on here, that means you are missing something. Let me know. Message me if you want to know what of those 3 that you're missing. But y'all should know what you are missing at this point. So please get it done. If you're on this slide, you see your name, great job. Keep up the work. And also, if you're on this slide, that means if you have missing assignments, I will input a grade in it for it instead of putting a 0 in. So it's a good reward in my opinion. But let us move on with the actual lesson. Learning goals. Learning goals for lesson 15. We're going to be able to explain how varied uses of the word crossover create a narrative arc that develops the meaning of the story. So we're going to be looking at one specific word, which is crossover. Is found a lot in this book, is even the title of the book. We're going to be focusing on how it creates a narrative arc itself throughout the whole entire book. The narrative arc we've been going over the past couple lessons. So if you are unfamiliar with that word, please go back and look at the past pre-recorded lesson videos to catch up, okay? The second one is we're going to be able to analyze the significance of the development of the word crossover in the novel through collaborative conversation with peers. Don't look at that, don't really, focus on that learning goal because that's basically the learning goal that we'd be doing if we were meeting in person, but we're virtual. So hopefully if everything calms down and some of y'all are choosing to go back to school, we can do that collaborative conversation later on in the school year. But moving on to the important questions, the first one is the essential question: what is the power of storytelling? We are really going to be focusing on this one later on in the lesson. So keep this essential question in the back of your mind. The focusing question is, how does form shape a story's meaning? Remember, we've been focusing on form for the last couple lessons, really throughout this entire module, honestly. Remember, form is structure and how the words are written and how the author wants you to read it, right? And remember, we've been focusing on narrative arc heavily in the past couple lessons, and narrative arc is a big part of form because it's basically how the story is shaped and how the story moves and progresses, right? Because it has beginning, middle, end, and that's what we've been focusing on. And the content framing question is, what does a deeper exploration of language choices reveal about the shape and meaning of the crossover? So that basically means is we're going to be deep diving into the word crossover, and we're going to be looking at 4 specific poems that deal with it. There's more than 4 poems in this book that have the word crossover, but we're going to be looking at those 4 specifically and how the word crossover has different meanings in each poem, okay? So the intro for this one is a little bit different. It's not really an activity. I want y'all to watch this video. I can't play it now because the audio won't go through, but I want you to watch this video. You can find it on the PowerPoint, or you can find it in your folder for today, which is the 10.8 folder. Okay? So watch this video and think about this question while you're watching it. Is, how does Kwame Alexander's discussion about poetry relate to what we have been doing in the module? So watch this video and then come back to this lesson video, okay? Okay, welcome back. So that was Kwame Alexander, who is the author of the book we've been reading, The Crossover. Hopefully, hopefully y'all know that by now. So I thought that video was really cool to show y'all as an intro for this lesson because Kwame Alexander, throughout that video, talks about why poetry is so important, right? He talks about how language matters in poetry, which is a really big thing because we've been focusing on descriptive, sensory, and figurative language throughout this module, right? Then he talks about the structure of a poem, right? And that a specific poem can have its own narrative arc, which we've been focusing on heavily, and tell a story on its own. Remember, the book The Crossover is made up of each individual poems, right? And a lot of the poems found in this book have its own narrative arc. So we are going to be focusing on that a little bit this lesson. So remember to pay attention, take notes if you can. And then lastly, in that video, he talked about the impact and the power of metaphors. And we've been focusing on metaphors heavily in the last couple lessons. I also did a refresher in the lesson 14 video. So go back if you're still struggling with metaphors. Remember, metaphors can really jazz up our writing and help paint a picture in the reader's head about the words that they're reading, right? So hopefully you like that video as well. I just love the enthusiasm Kwame Alexander has in it because he's so passionate about it. And I want y'all to be passionate about reading and analyzing and things like that as well. But let us move on into the meat of the lesson, which is what we're going to be focusing on. Remember, is the word crossover and how it has different meanings. It's the same word, just has several meanings for it. And we're going to be focusing on 3 questions. We're going to be focusing on what is the narrative arc created by the specific uses of the word crossover, which is the most significant use of the word crossover in the novel and why. And third, is the word crossover an effective title for this novel? And as you see below, there's a little chart or table about the word crossover, and there's several different definitions and several different synonyms that it has. So the definitions is, the first one is a basketball move. A player dribbles quickly from one hand to another. The second one is a point or place of crossing from one side to the other. And lastly is the process of achieving success in a different field or style. Okay, so as you can see from that one word, right, crossover, there's 3 different meanings. There's 3 different definitions for it. Right, so you should already at the start of this lesson see that, a word could be used, right, and have a different meaning depending on the context that it's used in, right? And we're going to be looking at 4 specific poems that show that, okay? And some of the synonyms, remember, is a word that has sort of the same meaning as it is: layup, dunk, transition, crossing, and transformation. So let us get into the poems, right, that I wanted to show y'all. The first poem we're going to be looking at is Where Do We Go From Here? Is one of the last poems in the book, okay? So I'm not going to read this poem. Y'all should have already read this by now. So I'm going to be basically looking at the specific use of the word crossover and the context that's used in. And then after I'll give y'all a brief summary of what happened in this poem. So the word crossover is used only once in this poem. So I'll read the part where it mentions it. So I grab Mom's right hand. JB grabs her left. The preacher says, a great father, son, and husband has crossed over. Amen. First, let me tell y'all about the context of this poem. The plot, what's happening so far. So, spoiler alert, Chuck Bell has passed away. He was suffering from heart problems, right? He had a lot of health issues, and he suffered a heart attack, and he ended up dying in the hospital. So what is happening essentially in this poem is they're at the funeral for Chuck, and the preacher is basically saying Chuck Bell, who was a great father, a great son, and a great husband, has moved on. Right? He's died. He's gone to heaven. So the definition or meaning of the word crossover in this poem specifically is a point or place of crossing from one side to the other. So Chuck Bell has gone from from earth, where he was living, to heaven, where he is currently dead. He passed on, he moved on. So he went from one place to the other. So first poem, one definition down. And then let's look at the second one. The second poem I want to show y'all is crossover. We've done this. Remember, this is an example of a definition poem. So as you can see, crossover, this is, again, definition of it. And it's used a couple times in this poem specifically. So the first use is, when done right, a crossover can break an opponent's ankles. Next is, Darren Williams' crossover is nice, but Allen Iverson's crossover was so deadly. And then lastly is, Dad taught me how to give a soft cross first, and then hit him with a hard crossover. So this is basically just talking about crossover. And the last use of the crossover is talking about how Chuck Bell taught Josh how to do a crossover, right? So the context or definition of the word or meaning of the word crossover in this poem is the first one. It is a basketball move. Player dribbles quickly from one hand to another. So they're talking about basketball in this one, right? So it's a very literal definition of them just dribbling the basketball. So we looked at two poems, and we've looked at two different meanings for the word crossover, right? So the crossover has been used in two different poems, and they've both meant different things. So hopefully you're slowly starting to see it. Next poem is article number 2 in the Daily News. So remember, this is an example of a found materials poem. They're taking text from one source and they're putting it in another, and they're putting it into the form of a poem. So the source that they're taking this from is a newspaper called the Daily News, and they're taking it from their January 14th edition of that newspaper. And this poem, the article is basically about Chuck Bell and how he died, what caused him to die, and his life. A summary, basically, a biography. So the use of the word crossover is only it's only used one time in this poem, and is known for his dazzling crossover. Chuck Bell was the captain of the Italian team. So again, this poem is talking about basketball. The basketball term for the word crossover of dribbling from one hand to the other. Chuck Bell was known for his crossover whenever he played, right? It was so good that he even taught it to Josh, and Josh picked it up, and he's been using it in his game ever since, right? So again, that's 3 poems down and 2 meanings of the word crossover used. And the last poem, and I think the coolest poem, is free throw. So let me pull free throws up. And we went over free throws in the last lesson 14. So please go back and watch that video. We talk about how free throws is such an important poem to the overall book because it's the last one, and it gives us a very perfect ending for the entire book. So for this poem, free throws is used 2 separate times. So a little bit of context of what's happening in this poem is after the funeral, everyone is back at the house, and Josh goes outside to shoot some free throws, right? And then JB comes in and they start talking. Right? They sort of repair their relationship a little bit. So the first use of the word crossover is whenever JB sees Josh shooting free throws and he walks up to him, right? So he goes, "I'm good. You?" I ask. He nods. "Good game last week," he says. "That crossover was wicked." So that's the first use of the word crossover in this poem. They use it twice, right? So the first use is talk about basketball, right? JB is basically just telling Josh, "Hey, good game last week in that championship game," which they won, by the way. And that crossover you did at the end was wicked, it was awesome, right? And remember, Chuck is the one that taught Josh, his crossover, right? And then the second use, or the last use of the word crossover in this poem is he dribbles back to the top of the key, fixes his eyes on the goal. I watch the ball leave his hands like a bird up high, skating the sky, crossing over us. So that's the last use of the word crossover, and the context of that one is very similar to the context found in Where Do We Go From Here, right? It's basically talking about a point or place of crossing from one side to the other. Let's talk about the ball leaving JB's hand and going towards the hoop, right? Is moving. It is crossing. Okay? So in that poem specifically, free throws, they use the word crossover twice, and both times have a different meaning, right? So we looked at 4 poems, and the word crossover has two different meanings in those poems, right? So we're sort of seeing how the word crossover sort of changes, right? And what's cool is the crossover. I'll let you know right now. We're going to focus on the first question, and then I'll go into that thought I was sort of going into. Remember, the first question is, what is a narrative arc created by the specific uses of the word crossover? What is really cool about the word crossover and why we're focusing on it specifically is it changes throughout the book, right? And what else changes throughout the book is Josh himself, right? His identity, his sense of self. He gets challenged a lot. He matures in the end. He becomes a different person. He changes. So the word crossover is sort of changing with Josh throughout the book because it keeps taking on different meanings throughout the poems it's going in, depending on the context that it's used in, right? So it's sort of creating this narrative arc in itself because it is changing constantly throughout the poems. It's going from a noun to a verb, right? So that is essentially how it's creating a narrative arc by just using the word crossover. It's changing throughout. It's setting a tone throughout the beginning, the middle, and the end. And it is really helping the story move along and also showing how Josh is changing as well, right? So the second question is, which is the most significant use of the word crossover in the book and why? I think the most significant use of the word crossover in the 4 poems that we've looked at, remember, there's a lot more poems throughout the book that use the word crossover. We just looked at 4 specifically. And remember, for this question, there's no wrong answer. It is your own opinion. One person can have one point of view, the other person can have another, and both could be right, right? This question is your own opinion of what use of the word crossover was the most important to you. For me, it was found in the book, or in the poem Free Throws. Remember that last poem we looked at? In that last poem in the book? Remember, there's 2 uses of the word crossover in that poem specifically, and I want to focus on the second use of that word, where it's talking about the ball crossing over them, right? The ball being up above them and moving towards the goal after JB shot it, right? I thought that use meant 2 different things. The ball literally is going over them. Figuratively, I thought the ball represented Chuck Bell, maybe crossing over by looking at them, right? Looking down on them and making sure that his family's still okay on Earth. Or the second was Josh, right? I thought the ball represented Josh crossing over and becoming more mature at the end of the book, crossing over and dealing with all the obstacles and challenges that he faced and coming out the end more mature and better, right? Or I thought it could also represent Josh and JB, their relationship, basically them turning the page and repairing it and becoming better, and hopefully becoming as close as they used to be. So those are just some of the reasons why I thought the second use of the word crossover found in Free Throws was the most significant use. Remember, there's no wrong answer to this question. It is whatever you think is the most important one, right? And then the third question is the word crossover an effective title for this book? Personally, yes. I think so. And here's why. So the word crossover, we know, has 2 different meanings that we've looked at throughout this book so far. So one is the basketball move, and the other one is the meaning of a point or a place of crossing from one side to the other. And I think the title itself has 2 different meanings. The title itself could mean the basketball move because it's the main move found throughout the book, right? It was Chuck Bell's go-to move in basketball, and it's Josh's go-to move in basketball. Right? They both use it in their game. They both, every time basketball game is mentioned in this book, the term crossover is found usually like every single time. And that's why, the word crossover for the title, or the title crossover, could mean just the basketball move. Or it could also mean the second meaning, a point or place of crossing from one side to the other. Um, I think the crossover could mean, or the title could mean Josh crossing over and becoming more mature after he faced all the obstacles and challenges that he went through, or it could mean Chuck Bell and how he passed away from his heart attack, right? How he crossed over into heaven, essentially. Um, I like the title The Crossover because it there's no wrong or right answer of what you think um, the title means, right? It's up to you. It's up to the person and what they think it is. Um, and I like that because that's basically how a lot of people read this book. They don't know what one specific thing means. It has a lot of different meanings, right? So that's why I think the title The Crossover is a really effective title. Hopefully you're slowly starting to understand this and it's starting to make more sense. Uh, if it doesn't, don't worry, I have an example. So we're going to keep continuing this about how a one word has a lot of different meanings and how those different meanings and used in the context that it's used in can help the narrative arc out. So the word we're going to be looking at is the word coach. So the word coach is used a couple of times and it has different meanings to it as well. It's really similar to the word crossover. So the word coach could mean like a head coach, like a mentor, right? Like a football coach or basketball coach, right? Or it could mean the action of coaching, just teaching, right? Educating, helping someone learn something, right? Coaching. So those are two meanings of the word coach, and I'm going to give you examples of how Kwame Brown or us as a class could use the word coach to help out the narrative arc. So beginning, middle, end. Right. So for the beginning of the book, we could use the word coach as a noun, right? We could use it to describe Chuck Bell and how, and we can use the word coach to describe Chuck Bell and show how his massive, massive influence on Josh and JB. He was a dad, he was a mentor, and he was a basketball coach to them, right? So we could use that's what we could do for the beginning of the book. We could use that to describe Chuck Bell's character whenever we introduce him, and show the influence that he had on his sons. Then moving on to the middle of the novel, is we could use the word coach as a verb. We could use it as a verb to suggest how conflict and the challenges that Josh faced actually were coaching him, and they were educating him to mature and become a better person, right? So we could use it as a verb, again, to show how the challenges Josh went through coached him, right? Then at the end of the book, we could use it to we could use the word coach to in a more of a figurative sense. We could use it as maybe like a metaphor to show how life is a coach, right? And it teaches you important lessons. So we could use it in a metaphor to show how life coached up Josh again and how it taught him all these important lessons to finally become more mature and find his way again, right? So again, those are just examples of the word coach and how we could use that in the context of this book to help move the narrative arc, right? And how to create our own narrative arc with just one word. So hopefully with the examples, the crossover and coach, you're able to see how we're able to look at one word, the same word, and annotate for different meanings in the context that they're used and how they help the narrative arc of a story, right? If you're still not getting it, then please let me know, and I'm more than happy to work with you individually for you to grasp it. So some questions I want y'all to think about is what word would make the best alternative title for the novel? So what word in your mind would make maybe a better title than the crossover? And how would your choice in a different title for the book change the meaning of the story? If you think of one that you want to share, please message me on Schoology because I would love to hear what you are thinking. So before we wrap up this lesson, I want y'all to think about this quote. And this quote's from Kwame Alexander, again, who is the author of this book. The quote is, "Poetry, because of the language we choose, because of the metaphors we use, we can make the reader feel something pretty powerful in those words." When I came across this quote, I knew that I had to share it with y'all because this is basically what we've been doing this entire module, right? We've been looking at a book of poems and we've been looking at the language, right? We've been looking for metaphors. And I'm trying to teach y'all how those things combined can create a story, right? And how the reader reads that story and they feel something, right? The main goal of storytelling or the main goal of reading is to feel something, to make the reader feel something. And remember, that is the essential question, right? I told you at the beginning to keep that essential question in mind is, what is the power of storytelling? And this is the power of storytelling, is we want to make the reader feel something. And poetry, because again, the language that we use, the structure that we put it in, the word choices we have, the descriptive, sensory, figurative language we use, and the metaphors we use, we can make the reader feel something powerful, right? So I want you to think about this quote and jot it down in your digital journal, in either the knowledge or the response journal, and just keep this in mind as we keep going throughout this module, right? Because remember, the question that we ultimately need to answer is, what is the power of storytelling? And I feel like this quote is a really good example of how powerful storytelling can really be. But let's wrap up this lesson. Remember, the content framing question was, what does a deeper exploration of language choices reveal about the shape and meaning of the crossover? Hopefully, by us deep diving into crossover and coach, you're slowly understanding how annotating for specific words can help shape the entire story, right? And can help the narrative arc. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns about this lesson or anything in general, y'all know how to reach me by now. Question board, message me on Schoology or email. I am more than willing to help out or answer any questions you have. No question is too big or too small. But other than that, that is it for this lesson. And we'll see you here for the next one. Bye.